I am just so delighted to be able to sit down with you this afternoon and talk a little bit about your life and certainly your many accomplishments, and just to congratulate you again on being inducted into the Taylor High School Duck Hall of Fame. And I suppose we need to start way back at the beginning, so it's your turn. Tell me about your beginnings, your early beginnings.
When we first moved to Taylor, the first thing they told me was my job, and that was to get the milk.
To get the milk, okay.
Well, I had to cross Howard Street. I think it was McLean, if I'm not mistaken.
There's McLean near Howard.
Yeah, and at the McLean home, they had cows. This is in the town. They had cows. And there were two sons in the family, and they were renting this house. And I was given a pail that had a handle on it. It was a quart size, had a handle on it, and also a lid. And I was told in the morning I was to go and get the milk.
Did you have to get it out of the cow?
No, I didn't, because at that time I didn't know how to milk. But anyway, that was, I would go over there, and it was the Falkenbergs that were renting that place, and they had two boys. And Mrs. Falkenberg would say, well, now, they aren't quite through yet, and she would seat me at a table with some clabber and put a little sugar on it.
Oh, my goodness.
And that's how. This gives you some idea of what life was like.
Oh, yes, yes. Now, tell me a little bit about what you remember about the school and where it was. And
well, it was located right across from the old high school.
Which is the old high school.
That's
now.
right.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, my uncle, G.W. Bowles, had moved to Austin in 1922, and his daughter was attending that high school. And so I always looked forward to seeing her, because she would come across the street when we were out having play outside, and she was going to the home economics lab, which was in the same building that we were in.
That's the kindergarten.
Yes.
So we're talking about the building that was across from the high school, currently on 7th Street.
Yes.
And that two-story building, were you in that two-story building, or were you?
No, this is a one-story building.
Across from that two-story building.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. It was kind of cat-cornered like that. Well, anyway, for our activities, we did a lot of artwork. And we had things to play with, different, I can't remember exactly what all the things were, but my mother saved a lot of the artwork that I had. And so later, it was funny, because I always wrote my name backward. I don't know why.
That's interesting, very interesting.
And see, I was 6 years old at that time, because you started school when you were 7.
But you were also proficient in German, and you could read it and write it.
By that time, I could read it, yes, in the old script. I learned the old script. Can't read it anymore.
Well, that's a lost art, really, reading that old script.
Anyway, at the end of the year, we had a program.
Graduation?
Well, it was
sort of.
The two teachers had developed this wonderful program, and everybody participated, and we had to have costumes.
Oh, my goodness.
And so my mother had to make me a costume. And
do you remember your costume?
I know it was navy blue, and it was some kind of but it was material. It wasn't paper, because they made a lot of paper ones too. But anyway, But it was, and my grandparents came, and oh, that was such a wonderful thing. But I have to tell you one other thing about that school. My dad always left me at the school, and he would go to his office, which was downtown on the second floor above the drugstore. Mm-hmm. You can kind of imagine that, okay. Well, one day he left me at the school like he always did, and nobody came to the school.
Okay.
And I didn't know what was happening. I was scared because I didn't know how I was going to get home or anything. And well, but I said, I can get to Howard Street, and we live on Thompson Avenue. Mm-hmm. And I know when I get to the area where Thompson Avenue is, I'll be okay. Well, I started out and I got to Howard Street, and lo and behold, my teacher came along in her car, and she saw me there, and she said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, it's a holiday."
Oh.
And so she took me home.
She took you home.
Yes.
All right.
But I mean, little things like that happened.
Yeah.
And
so you all had your father had a vehicle. I mean, you.
yeah. He had a car. He had a Model T Ford.
Model T
car.
Ford. All right.
And my teacher had a real fancy car, and oh, I was scared to death almost to get in that car. And
do you remember what the streets were like back then? Were they paved?
They were paved.
They were paved.
Yeah. These streets were, not all the streets in Taylor were paved.
No, no.
But Howard Street was one of the major.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was in an office building with Dan Moody and Judge Kreitz.
Oh my
And
goodness.
they were the ones who got that Ku Klux Klan under control.
Absolutely.
And that is an important thing to remember.
Yes, yes, most definitely.
Yeah. And I just didn't, I mean, they didn't pay any attention to me. I was a little kid. But I paid attention to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a very, very interesting part of the history of Taylor and
Yes,
the
it is,
Klan.
very.
Very
And you know, Dan Moody's home is
right there.
right
yes.
there, and it is a museum.
Mm-hmm. It is. So then tell me about, then you left Taylor.
We moved down to Los Angeles, and there were 2 first grades in my class, and that was in the East Side School. I've forgotten what it was called now. But when I got to Los Angeles, there was a little 2-room school, because this was new. Everything was new there. And so I was in the first grade.
Interesting.
But everything took place in that little schoolhouse. We didn't have a church, but everybody came to church. In the older students' room, there were 2 rooms, you see, and of course I was in the first grade, and I was in one, and so they had to sit in the desks of the school children to have Sunday school and church.
Well, that's interesting.
And we had a lot of preachers that came to serve us there, and there was no official organization at all. But my mother soon became treasurer of the church, and she ordered whatever materials they did from so that they could have Sunday school and things like that. On Sunday nights, we always had singing. Now you can see why, because there was nothing else to do. Saturday nights, when we got old enough, we had little dances in the local place there, and Sundays we had singing. the school things were really fun
School was fun.
because we played outside twice. We had 2 recesses. And during those early years, when we were in that little 2-room school, we played with marbles, and we had hopscotch, and we threw the ball over the house. And
Probably played jacks. Did you play jacks?
oh yes, we played jacks. And my dad kept those things in the store, so they had a place to buy them. And
Oh, that is
and
fun.
but we also learned to play baseball.
Oh, yes.
But we made the ball with string. And then we had a grubbing hoe handle for a bat.
Oh, how wonderful. Well, yeah,
Well,
a
as
grubbing
we-
hoe would work, wouldn't it?
Yeah, as we got along into the 4th and 5th grade, we wanted that sort of thing. Well, then we finally got a softball,
Okay.
and we had to learn the rules for that. But that was after we moved to the building. They finally built a larger school, and it had 4 rooms, but they never had but 3 teachers.
4 rooms and 3 teachers. And how many grades?
And that was through 10 grades.
10th grade, okay. So that kind of brings us to, then you had to,
We had to go somewhere else. When Christmas came, we had the big Christmas tree there, and we handed out these little paper sacks of gifts, and an orange and an apple. And nuts and candies. Everybody got one, and everybody in the community came. And some of them didn't have Christmas trees in their homes, and so they brought their gifts, and they were delivered there.
oh,
And my mother was really interested in helping some of the people, some of the men who were single. And so she made her usual Christmas goodies, and she would have a box for each one of them. Well, my dad owned the grocery store. And so in those days, my mother had to milk the cow because he had to be at that grocery store.
absolutely.
And, well, it was more than groceries. It was really all
Sort of a
kinds
dry
of,
goods
yeah,
and what have you.
everything. Even women's hats were on something that
A
you
lot
could,
cheaper back then, probably, than now.
and shoes and everything. But anyway, he had someone else that was with him. But since he had had all that business experience, he took care of the books, and he was also the postmaster.
Oh, my goodness.
This
One-man community almost
Yeah,
there.
it was.
Did you have electricity always, or were you
No.
prior to electricity?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. On the farm where I was born, there was no utilities. When we moved to Taylor, my mother was thrilled to death because we had running water and electricity. When we moved to Los Angeles, we had running water but no electricity. But we used gasoline lanterns.
Yes, 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 yes. Did she cook on a gasoline stove?
No, she had we called it a coal oil stove.
Okay, wood
Yeah.
burning, I mean, that type?
Yeah, at that time we called it coal oil. I don't
Isn't
know.
it amazing what they could produce under those means, really? Some of the best food I've ever eaten in my lifetime, you know?
Well, Mother had always said she was not going to cook on a wood stove, and so we moved that coal oil stove from the farm to Taylor, and then to Los Angeles.
To Los Angeles.
And when things were hard, she would use that oven and maybe have baked potatoes and cook her homemade bread and everything all at one time in that oven.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
to save on the amount
Right.
of coal
Right,
oil that
right.
The time came And in 1932, where we were in the worst depression you can ever imagine.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, we had to find out how I was going to get my degree. Not my degree, but my
Diploma. Your high school.
diploma. And Lucille, the Bowles' daughter, married that summer.
Is that the one that you remember from kindergarten?
No, well, no, yeah, she's the same one.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
and so I had gotten her well acquainted with her when they lived in Taylor. It was just that 1 year.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she was the same one, and she was getting married. And Mother told my uncle, that was her oldest brother, as I said, that they didn't know what they were going to do because there was no 11th grade. And I couldn't go to Cotulla to school. I'd had a room over there because 18 miles, and we only had one car.
Right, right.
And so my uncle said, well, what we can do is Judah can come live with us, and she can take Lucille's bedroom. So that's how I got to Taylor in 1932.
And you started at Taylor High School then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I walked into that building, and here was this library. I had never seen a library. Oh, I was so excited because I love to read. And I knew. And then Freddie was also, their youngest son, was in the same grade that I was, so he was always helping me with things. And he helped me with my schedule. I told him that I really thought I needed to take home economics because I didn't know much about. I knew how my mother ran a home, but I didn't know very much about anything. I said, I didn't know there was such a thing as a salad fork. I'd never seen one. and so he said, well, you can go ahead and take that. Now, what else would you like to take? And I said, I have to have senior English, and I've never had, in my English class, any literature. It's always been how to parse a sentence and diagram, and it was all, I really almost memorized that little booklet that we had.
You had that little plain English booklet. I bet. Walsh's plain English book. I think I still have one of those somewhere.
Okay. And so I had to have senior English, and one semester was grammar, but the other semester was literature. And I had started my Spanish, and so I had a wonderful Spanish teacher.
Tell me about her.
Oh, Lilis Lewis was her name. Did you ever know her?
No, I think she was a little bit, she was already gone by the time that.
But she had married a Taylor man and had left Taylor. But anyway, she was a wonderful teacher.
Did you walk to school or did you?
Well, sometimes my uncle would take us, but it was about a mile, and other times we walked. And I didn't come home for lunch.
Okay.
I took an apple or some piece of fruit, and Lilis Lewis knew that I had a good background already for my Spanish, and she said, would I help her grade the papers for the first year class? And I said I would glad to do that during the lunch hour because I was not going home. That was a walk that far and then walk back. Yeah, it was about a mile. And so that's what I did. And
they did have lunches in the cafeteria, though, correct? I mean, there were lunches, but they cost, obviously.
But one time they gave me a nickel, and I bought a bowl of soup.
All right.
They were going to be out of town, and so they gave me a nickel. And
a nickel for a bowl of soup?
And that's the only time I ever ate in that cafeteria. But we had the most wonderful uh, uh, programs in the auditorium. I guess I'm trying to think. It was a regular auditorium because I know we had our graduation exercise in that auditorium.
You graduated in 32, so that would have
I know,
been
33.
33, so that would have been the school on 7th Street then. Okay.
Yeah, that
okay.
was.
In the auditorium there. Okay.
So that was really good. Well, there's so many things I can.
What else do you
think of.
remember about your senior year?
But in my
what did you
senior-
participate in, or what could you participate in?
You know, I had a really good PE teacher, and I liked sports. And so I was able to play tennis and volleyball that year after school in the afternoons. We didn't have any competition with other schools. It was just all within our school. They were going to have the junior-senior banquet. There was no way I was going to have a formal. Everybody was wearing a formal. Well, Lillis Lewis said,
This is the Spanish teacher.
yeah, the Spanish. She said, you know, I went to Europe last summer, and on the boat, we had to dress every evening. And I have several evening dresses, and I bet you could wear one of those.
Oh, how
She gave me that dress to wear, and I went to the banquet with Freddie.
Oh.
Freddie's girlfriend had graduated the year before.
Okay, so
So-
you weren't stealing another.
No,
okay.
no. And the other thing is,
And where was the prom? Do you remember?
it was, I'm sure.
Probably in the gym or
In
in the
the gym.
cafeteria.
Yeah. No, I'm sure it was in the cafeteria. Yeah. But remember, this was they didn't have any money. This was, but the I
This was
didn't.
still the Depression. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember you're telling me before about a job that you had during wartime.
Yeah, that's what I was going to tell you. But then when school was out, I found out that Spanish and German teachers were getting jobs with the federal government as censors.
It's amazing. Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, what were you censoring?
We were censoring mail.
I see.
And I started out in San Antonio, and I was doing magazines and newspapers and things like that. I was in that section. I wasn't reading mail.
The magazines were from,
They were from Latin American countries
I see.
because there were a lot of Germans that owned businesses in the Central American countries, and some in Mexico also. And they wanted to know what was going on down there. It was very important that we...
For security.
Yeah.
I know that you were a docent at the,
LBJ Library for 29 years
for 29 years.
after I retired.
After you retired for 29 years, you were a docent.
And
So you must have amassed thousands of hours there.
but you see, I only went one day a week.
Well, that's still quite an accomplishment to go one day a week for
Well-
29 years. My goodness.
Well, the other things, the Pfluger family had asked me to take over the genealogy, and so I did that. And I started somewhere in the 70s, and finally, Kent is Leon's son. Okay, and Kent took over.
Oh, Kent has taken over the
Yeah.
genealogy?
Yeah.
Oh, well,
I had
that's in good
published-
hands then.
I had published 2 books, and he published a third, and I think he's going to do something on the Bowles family. This was all Pfluger.
Do you remember what your first teaching salary was?
Yeah, it was $90 a month, $810 a year.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I mean, to think of a beginning teacher today, I mean, there's no I can't even understand the concept there. I remember being so excited when my take-home salary was $300. I was ecstatic. But you've also traveled extensively,
Yeah, I
haven't you?
traveled to all of this, every continent except Antarctica.
Oh my goodness.
The only thing I did in Africa was Kenya. And I took two of my grandsons and my daughter.
And didn't you and your husband sponsor some trips?
Oh, yeah, well,
Uh,
I did a lot of trip sponsoring
okay.
with our church and everything. I love to sponsor trips.
Okay. All right. Okay.
But we, the retired teachers at that time had a young a teacher that decided to do trips. And he was the one that helped us get those trips that were reasonable for teachers.
And
It's-
that's wonderful, really.
And that's where we had a lot of opportunities.
And I think somebody, well, I think it was Nancy Pfluger-Payne, a friend of mine, who told me that you actually have a map or something that you...
Oh, yeah, I have a map that shows all the places I've been.
Okay, all right. Places you've been and the things you've seen.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I always say that Australia was great, but New Zealand was my favorite.
Oh,